You have to essentially create your work from home environment the same way that you create your in-person office. And I really want to challenge people with that thought. It is very viable for you to integrate a lot of the things that you had in your in-person environment in your remote environment, but they are not the same, right? You cannot just copy and paste from one to the other and expect to have the same outcome. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast. And on today's episode, we are going to talk about how to ditch your office space and truly create a work from home remote law firm. All right. So everyone, I'm happy to be talking about this topic today. Someone specifically asked that I cover this topic on the podcast because there has been a movement of law firms to working from home and having a remote culture. But there are still a lot of people that struggle with how to do that. And I think it's really unfortunate that as much as we have evolved in our technology and continue to see rapid fire changes, just even a couple of years ago, AI was something that very few lawyers had even heard of. And now it is commonly built into our technology systems. It's something we talk about all the time. A lot of law firms are using it. It is really revolutionizing the way that we practice law and that we engage in the business of law. But there are still a lot of lawyers that are very anxious about how to create a work from home arrangement in their law firm and how to create a truly remote environment. When I hear lawyers talk about this, the thing that comes up all the time is that they don't know that they can trust their teams if they send them home to work. How are they ever going to get their teams to truly be working instead of watching TV or playing on Facebook? If there's not someone to make sure that the teams are doing what's required, how can you ever truly look away while you are, having your teams work at home? And I see a lot of snarky responses to this from people who have established remote law firms and don't seem to have a problem with it and experience nothing but satisfaction in that arrangement. A lot of times you'll hear things like, well, if you can't trust them at home, then why did you hire them? Or, well, are you standing over them looking at everything that they do when you're in the law firm office? Why would it be that you'd be standing over them or feel the need to do that when they're working from home? And I understand that response, right? There is some truth at the heart of those questions. But I think we have to really give grace and space to people who have not yet seen this, right? Unless it's real to you, it's never going to be something that your mind immediately goes to as just as viable as what you're currently doing. And a lot of times we blame and shame lawyers who don't understand how to do things in a new and different way because they haven't experienced it yet. And that oftentimes creates just that much more resistance to making those changes in the first place. I remember the first time that I was introduced to the concept of a non-attorney salesperson. And I started asking questions like, well, how is it ethical for a non-attorney to sell legal services? And I remember the very shame-filled, aggressive, almost abusive responses that I got. Well, of course it's ethical. You just can't see it because you have resistance around doing that. And I remember thinking, well, that might be true. There could be a different way to look at this, but if you're going to be an asshole in how you respond to me about it, how am I ever going to want to look at it your way, right? So I think we have to just be a little cautious with how we approach discussing this topic and let people have their doubts and have their questions, but just give them a sense that there is a way to do it that they just haven't yet encountered. So I want to do that today. And we're just going to glaze the surface. There's a lot that goes into remote work culture, but I want to talk about it in a way that I think will make it a little bit easier to digest for people that are new to the idea of creating a work environment that is remote and that may have some fears and concerns about it. So the first thing I want to talk about is this idea that you have to essentially create your at home, your work from home environment the same way that you create your in-person office. And I really want to challenge people with that thought. It is very viable for you to integrate a lot of the things that you had in your in-person environment in your remote environment, but they are not the same, right? You cannot just copy and paste from one to the other and expect to have the same outcome. And part of the reason why a lot of law firm owners are having difficulty with this and do end up hiring people that they can't trust and do have negative outcomes is because they do just that, right? They try to take what they know, which is working in an office, and just shift it to people working at home. And you really cannot do that. The reason why is because we as beings, right? We as human beings, we have our own operating system in our mind for how things work. And we fill in the blanks with what we don't know with our patterned behavior around the things that we do know. So I want you to think about it like this, right? The first time you learned how to drive a car, you understood, having seen other people drive cars, that your hands are to grip the steering wheel. And you understood that you were going to most likely use one foot and shift back and forth between the brake pedal and the gas pedal. And you understood that there was a steering column that you were going to use to shift between drive and neutral and reverse, right? So you had a conception. But there were some things you didn't have a conception of, right? So you didn't have a conception of starting the car with your foot on the brake pedal. And when you took your foot off the brake pedal, that the car might immediately go into motion even before you put your foot on the gas pedal. And that you needed to be prepared for that relative to where you were in order to not hit something or, not encounter a sudden shift in the car that you weren't prepared for. You didn't have an operating system for that. What your mind filled in was the way this works is I see my foot moving back and forth. So I am going to assume when my foot is on the brake, the car is still, and when my foot is on the gas, the car is moving. You didn't have that operating system or that script for what was supposed to happen in between moving between brake and gas, right? Your mind filled in the blank that there was nothing there because you didn't have an activity there. And so if no one ever taught you, when you move your foot from the brake to the gas pedal, as soon as you take your foot off the brake pedal, the car is going to be in motion or is going to accelerate or is going to be shifting out of the still position into movement. You would not have been prepared for the possibility that you could immediately, depending on where you're parked, roll forward or roll backward into someone or something, right? You had to figure that out. So I want you to think about that the same way as we are talking about remote work environments, right? You don't have a conception for certain things in a remote space because they don't exist in the operating system that you have in the in-person space. So I want to just think about that globally. And the first thing that we're going to talk about 3 primary areas that will give you some success strategies around creating remote work environments. The first one is the need for community, right? We as human beings, we are tribal and we need people, right? One of the greatest ways that we know to punish someone in jail for doing something wrong is to put them in solitary confinement. That in and of itself is a punishment, not being around other people. So I want you to think about the fact that a lot of humans, when they have created their own internal script for how to interact in a workplace that has people around them, whether they are introverted and have to work to be around other people, i.e. they don't like necessarily having a lot of people around them and they have to transition their mind for how to handle that, or they love being around people and they very much gravitate toward interacting with people as a way to learn, as a way to grow, as a way to get what they need to get done in a workplace. They're not going to be able to simply shift from being in person to being remote just because your workplace is now going to have that structure. They're going to have an operating system for how to engage with people when they are in the remote space, because they can't just happen upon someone or know that they have an engagement scheduled or know that there's going to be the expectation of water cooler talk in the remote space the way that there is in the in-person space. So for creating community, and that's, strategy number one, you have to be intentional around it. Well, what does that mean? That means creating some type of container. That can be Slack. It can be Teams. There are other software, other platforms where you can create little avatars of your people to engage in a workplace that is virtual, but that they can engage with. But you have to have a way for people to interact with other people in order to facilitate the work that they do in the remote space, the same way that they would do in person, right? So the thing I want you to think about with community is think about not only the things we have to get done, right? We have to meet to collaborate if we are co-working on a document, or we might have to meet to go over metrics if we are planning out a marketing plan. Those types of meetings, we're going to talk about meetings in a moment. Those types of meetings are a little bit easier for people to wrap their mind around, right? Instead of meeting you in an office, I'm meeting you on Zoom. But what about the meetings that are less orchestrated and more happenstance, right? The water cooler. You can create a virtual water cooler, and I highly recommend that you do, so that people have the opportunity to engage with each other in a more socialized way in the workplace. Part of what people get out of being in different work environments is the people that they will work with. And there are a lot of people that will say that even if they are soured on a job, they stay longer than they might otherwise have because of the people that they work with, right? It's just like leaving a family or leaving a friendship circle when people leave their workplaces because they're leaving friends at work. So you want to make sure that that element of the human aspect of work is still very much baked into your culture. That can be anything from having a water cooler channel in your Slack community, or it can be having a place where people just socialize or just engage, right? You can have a joke corner in your Slack community. One thing that we started doing during COVID was we created a morning motivation channel, and every day we would take turns posting something inspirational or something that made us laugh or something that we could share with each other that no one knew, or limericks or jokes, favorite music, favorite videos, just something so that people had to engage with each other the same way that they would engage with each other in the course of the workday in your in-person space. Okay. So strategy number one, you have to build community. Strategy number two really deals with communication, and as I referenced earlier, meetings. Now, I know a lot of you are rolling your eyes as soon as I say meetings. You're immediately thinking, oh my God, are we going to now have to have a whole bunch of superfluous meetings that we would normally say, stick it in an email? And the answer to a certain degree is yes. Now, the meetings don't have to be superfluous. I'm not suggesting that you start wasting a lot of time with nonsensical meetings that really are just time wasters. But there are meetings that you should be having on a regular basis so that people can interact with people and have a productive flow to their work, right? Because what is fundamentally different about your workplace that is remote than from in person that you must build is you must build a KPI culture. A KPI culture is not the same as saying, I'm requiring that my attorneys bill a certain number of hours, or I'm requiring that my marketing assistant generate a certain number of leads. That is a KPI, but that's not a KPI culture. A KPI culture is that the driving force of the people is that they are connecting around making sure that they are hitting metrics, right? And in order to do that, you will systematize some of the activity that is people-centric and some of the activity that is KPI-centric. So if you have, for instance, lawyers that you're requiring to bill a certain number of hours, one metric is the hours that they build, but another metric is meeting with team members about getting productive work in order to facilitate that. And you build that into the requirement chain so that people are interacting with each other by requirement, not just by happenstance, right? Happenstance happens with community and culture, right? In strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is very intentional. It is building an attitude that says the things that I have to do in the course of my week are I have to bill a certain number of hours. I have to meet with certain people. I have to exchange certain information. The reason why you want to do that is that a KPI culture very much keeps people in connectivity with each other. In other words, I can't be successful unless I engage with you. That is a part of my success metric. It is very easy when we work in an office to just be looking at people's productivity, right? To just be saying, this person is a good lawyer, paralegal, marketing assistant, whatever their role is, because they met the quantitative goal. But you want to build a certain amount of qualitative goals into what happens in your KPI culture, and that happens naturally through people interacting with each other. More interaction is required in a remote environment because you don't want people to feel isolated. And you also recognize that what tends to happen is your culture can very easily stagnate if you are not intentional in building it. And one of the ways that you create intentionally around culture is people interactions, right? And one of the things that you'll find is that even people who are very introverted need to be around people in ways that they don't necessarily understand, right? You can be somebody who does not thrive and gain your energy from being around people, but you can still like to be around people. I'm a perfect example of that. I use myself as the example because I know I have 100% authority to throw out my own stuff for you guys to learn from. But I'll tell you, like there's, I'm very much an introvert and I get worn down by being overstimulated with people, but I definitely need to be around people. There are times where if I'm in the house in the course of a day, I will literally just go out and walk in the mall. Not because I want to talk to people, not because I want to make new friends, not because I need to exchange information, but I just need the energy of being around people. Right. And I will feel less grounded, less productive, less successful if I don't have that experience. I am aware of that. There are a lot of people who would call themselves introverts and say, oh, if I don't see anybody for 3 months, I'm happy with that. But is that really true? They might believe that it's true because they're not missing people. But when they think about how they are most successful, oftentimes it is because they are absorbing information from people, absorbing activity from people, inspiration from people, even though they're not having conversations, they're not directly engaging, right? There is still something to be gained from being in the community of your peers. So how are we going to schedule these meetings, right? Well, think about who needs to engage with whom and for what purpose. Think about lawyers, kind of the easy one. Lawyers might need to engage with each other. So you could have partners engaging with associates, engaging with interns. But there's also the lawyer to paralegal, lawyer to legal assistant engagement that facilitates work. And if you have any type of work that involves courts and adverse counsel, you almost always are going to have that. So you want to make sure that those meetings are scheduled at least weekly, but oftentimes more frequently than weekly, because as work goes off of one desk and to the extension desk, right? The extension desk being the staff person who works with the primary driver. So if you have like in an immigration practice, your paralegals might be primary drivers and work is going out to legal assistants. In many litigation practices, the lawyer is the driver and work is going out to paralegals. In many transactional practice, the lawyer is the driver and work is going out to legal secretaries, right? So you have to think about how your work flows. Who is initiating work and giving it over to someone else? And is that work then terminal, meaning off of my desk and then to your desk and out the door? Or is that work going to reverberate back, i.e. off my desk to your desk and back to my desk for either final review or some other activity? So you have to think about that when you think about how work is going to get done. But you want to have those meetings scheduled pretty frequently in order that, again, you maintain relationship, you maintain culture, but you also keep people interacting with each other. And you also keep work flowing smoothly through your company. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about, so we've talked about community and we talked about regular meetings, but the last thing, and this is a really important one, and it also can help to alleviate a lot of that concern that lawyers have when we talk about, can I trust people working from home? Can I trust that they're actually doing work? And it's the issue of professionalism. Professionalism has to be managed differently out of, when you are working from home and when you're physically out of an office than when you are working together in an office space. So what I mean by that is we all have seen those posts on social media where some lawyer is lamenting the fact that they have a great new legal assistant who's wonderful, except they showed up on their third day of work in a leopard print, low-cut bodysuit that was just not appropriate for the workplace. And now they have to have a very uncomfortable, awkward conversation. Well, a lot of us think, well, that's unfortunate, but that's an isolated event for that particular law firm. You might have that view, but in remote experiences, what you're going to have is far more of those types of experiences in the average remote law firm. And the reason is because people have, again, a professionalism script for how they should engage in a law firm. They might have seen law firms on television. Unless you're taking your cues from Ally McBeal, you're probably thinking, okay, lawyers in law firms, we wear suits, we use formal language, we abstain from profanity, we engage in a certain way. And then you take that script and you modify it based on how you see people engaging in your particular workplace, right? So in this particular workplace, John's workplace might have a lot of profanity. People might be F-bombing all over the place. And in Stacy's workplace, that might be a place where everybody comes in business casual. No one ever wears a suit. Everyone is in sweaters and slacks, right? You take your script, your mental frame, and then you modify it based on what you're seeing. Well, in a remote work environment, you aren't seeing in the same way that you are seeing in an in-person workplace, right? You might have staff meetings. Maybe those are once a quarter. Maybe those are once a month. Most are not probably having a staff meeting every 2 weeks. But minimally, you're gathering as a large group, everyone in the company, periodically, but certainly not so periodically that it's a daily immersion of seeing how people dress, speak, interact, come out of their office, engage with each other, right? You don't pick that up from the ether in a remote environment the same way you do in an in-person environment. So how then do you expect people to have a professionalism script when that script for what worked in person is now completely thrown out of the window when we're at home, right? So you can still have certain rules. You can legislate for professionalism. That might be something like your written dress code, right? You should be talking to people about what is expected, but not just expected for what they look like, but expected for how they engage. Perfect example. I hear all the time lawyers that have remote work environments talk about this issue of people showing up not on camera. It is mystifying to me that you could think that you can build a relationship with another person without the benefit of sight. Now, I am trying not to be ableist in saying that. We obviously know that blind people can build relationships, but our sight is our most dominant sense. We take in more of the things that we have an understanding of through our sight than any other sense. So if you in a workplace would not show up to someone's office to have a meeting with a bag over your head, that eliminates your ability of sight, and or would not put a bag over their head so they could not see you, why would you show up to a meeting in a virtual space without the benefit of your camera on and without the expectation that your colleague, peer, etc., has their camera on? Well, the reason you would do that is because no one ever taught you not to, right? You didn't develop the same script. You're not thinking what is important about a meeting is not just the words I'm exchanging. It's not just the data, but it is communication. And communication includes what we see, the communication mechanism, the medium through which we communicate, the nonverbal cues that we pick up, right? A lot of that comes in through our sight, and we cut that off when we don't have our videos on. So have a rule around that. Another thing that you want to think about is how people show up on camera, right? So a lot of times people think, oh, I'm working from home. I have the freedom to be able to, run in between meetings to throw in a load of laundry. I can make my lunch while I am listening to a recording of Discovery. There's lots of benefits to working from home. But what does need to be stressed to people is that they are working from home. So that means certain things that you expect include how they will engage in your workplace, and your workplace is your virtual environment. So what does that look like? Well, that could mean that you talk to people about what they look like on camera, right? Are they allowed to be in jeans and a t-shirt, or do you require what they would be inclined to wear to court? Are they expected to be well groomed when they're on camera, i.e., that they shouldn't have their hair in a messy bun with no makeup on, and they shouldn't appear like they're about to run out to the grocery store. They should appear like they would be meeting a client for the first time in the office, in the physical office, if one were to exist, the same way that they would show up on camera. You also want to think about what is expected for what behavior is tolerated on camera versus not. We have a client who actually talked to us about his virtual workplace, and he tells the story about the fact that he has a wonderful legal assistant. He's only been a remote workplace for a couple of years, but he has had this legal assistant for many years. And one of the things that stunned him was one day they were having a staff meeting, and the legal assistant's son came into the room, and she had no problem putting herself on mute, chatting with him, talking with him, engaging with him, and eventually putting him on her lap and, just attending the meeting, right? He's over here. He's kind of futzing around on the table. She's taking notes on her notepad, clearly distracted, but basically paying attention. And the attorney came to us and said, well, what do I do? Like, this is my best legal assistant. She's been with me for years. I don't even know how to have a conversation with her about this. And so we coached him around not only what to say, but how to say it. But the point is that the reason why his legal assistant felt it was okay to engage with her child is because she's at home, her child's at home, and this is what she apparently does at home. Now, we asked some questions. Was this particular team member productive, meeting all of the KPIs? And he had done a very good job of laying out KPIs and holding her accountable to it. And he said, nope, she's still a rock star. Like, her work is not an issue at all, but I don't want kids showing up in our at-home, staff meeting. I just never thought I would even have to discuss that. And one of the challenges that arises from that is there are some people that can literally tether a child to one shoulder. The kid is screaming, the kid is doing whatever, and they're just paying attention and can completely tune it out, right? And then there are other people who, if their child is within a 10-mile radius, they are completely not productive at work. They are completely not paying attention. They're completely not interested in the job. They're focused only on their child, and they're really phoning it in with work, right? So you can't have a hodgepodge rule that favors the highly productive go-get-it person and says to the person who is less capable in that area, sorry, you can't have your child at work while this employee can have his or her child at work. You have to have a rule that applies to everyone so that you maintain fairness and impartiality with the enforcement of rules and the meting out of consequences and the growth opportunities, etc., for your team members. So how do you do that? You set the standard, right? Whatever your standard is going to be. Some people perfectly fine having kids in the staff meeting. I wouldn't recommend it, but there are people that want to have that culture. That's their choice. If that's your choice, that should also be communicated so that no one feels like, oh, I see these people who've been here for however long have their kids on their lap. I would never think to do that. I don't think it's appropriate. And I now feel like I'm losing out on a benefit that I could otherwise have, right? So again, this requires communication. Now, for a lot of you, you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of work. It is, but it isn't. Because there are a lot of things that you have gotten into the habit of doing over the course of years that you have worked in in-person offices, somebody else's and your own when you started your law firm, that you had to absorb over time and learn what is accepted, not accepted. Similarly, people will learn what is accepted and not accepted when they come into your work environment, but you have to help them with that. So laying out a framework for that can actually be very beneficial. And because it does require more intentionality, it oftentimes allows you to create your culture that much stronger, that much faster, and that much clearer, right? So it's easy to see very soon after you hire someone, is this person a fit or is this person not? It's very easy to test when you are looking into references and when you are putting people through the hiring protocols that we recommend, you're actually having them do some work as a part of the process of interviewing them, that you'll see, this is not going to work out based on how we hold people accountable, what we require of them, what we allow them to do, the level of freedom we give them, the level of expectation that we give them, etc. But all of that, again, starts with the idea that you figure out what you really want your workplace to look like. What are the things that might need to shift in your remote environment before you actually launch it? And if you're already launched and it's not working out so well, think about what tweaks you might need to make. What are the things that you just kind of took for granted with your virtual work environment because of how you did things in person that might now need a little bit more thought and development? All right, everyone. You have been listening to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, where today we talked about your remote work environment. I will see you on our next episode.